Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bird Runningwater, and I am the director of Sundance Institute's Indigenous Program. I also belong to the Cheyenne and Mescalero Apache tribes, and I'm logging in today from Tongva and Tataviam Indigenous lands here in Los Angeles. And I'm so honored to be here, to be hosting this chat today where we'll be centering Indigenous women and through two of our specific alumni from our Indigenous program. I did want to start out by just kind of making a series of comments about, the purpose of this conversation and who our hosts are. But these conversations are meant to speak directly to you, applicants, fellow artists, supporters, and friends, and in hopes of shedding light on how this ongoing crisis is affecting the world and how we are grappling with it. I also did want to say that we're dropping a link into the chat so that those of you who are participating can do your own land acknowledgement from where you are. And if you don't know, you can click on that link and it'll help you identify the Indigenous lands that you are on. So make sure you drop that into the chat. To quickly summarize what Artist Relief is, we're a coalition of national arts grants makers who have come together to support artists across the US during the COVID-19 crisis through both financial and informational resources. This coalition includes the Academy of American Poets, Artadia, Creative Capital, Foundation for Contemporary Arts, MAP Fund, National Young Arts Foundation, and United States Artists. Thank you to those organizations for providing this important support. To date, they've provided $5,000 grants to 2,100 individual artists, which is $10.5 million directly to artists in need. If you're an artist and you want to apply, you can find our application online at artistrelief.org. It's meant to be straightforward and should only take about 10 minutes. If you applied in the past and have not yet received a grant, you can continue to apply each month. So make sure you do apply again. Again, that would be at artistrelief.org. This monthly live conversation series and our weekly series of wellness videos, which you can find here on our YouTube page as well, are presented with the support of Compound, a new contemporary art and wellness complex in Long Beach, California. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and here on YouTube for updates about programming, application cycles, and more. I am so honored to be presenting to you these really wonderful artists, and I would like to give them the opportunity to introduce themselves to our audience. Who's going to go first? Erica?
Niawe, Scano Swagwego, Gatsenoni Tsentnanto Igies, Ondawayesta ni Gyaso, Gayakono Niwa Shapde, and they Wahondas Niwage Shade. Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be here today. My name is Erica, and I am from the Seneca Cayuga Nation, and I am Deer Clan. So happy to be joining you today from my ancestral lands here in Haudenosaunee territory on Cayuga Lake in upstate New York.
Thank you, Erica. Shaandiin? Oh, you're still muted, Shaandiin.
Whoa, haven't made that mistake before. Just kidding. Hi, my name is Shaandiin Tome. I am from Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm Diné, or Navajo. Albuquerque, New Mexico is located on Pueblo Tiwa land. And I don't really know what else to say, so this is a super short introduction.
Thank you. Well, Yate, how about that? When we were trying to figure out how we could approach this conversation, we saw it as a really great opportunity, like I mentioned before, to really center, I think, Indigenous women artists, I think given, the unique perspectives and points of views that they have. And also, I think one of the most interesting things that I found in our preliminary talks with our artists today is recognizing that we all come from matriarchal and matrilineal cultures. Our tribes really center, the importance in our societal functions around the role of women and the leadership of women, which is inherent to us It's been, you know, it's been our practice since time immemorial. And so I wanted to be able to weave in those points of view, I think, given the world that we live in, and, you know, and the idea of modernity that, you know, I think that we're all, I think, probably really confronting right now, given the state of the world with the ongoing pandemic and also the racial justice reckoning that's happening in our country and the questioning of processes and systems. And so, you know, I thought that this could be a really fruitful conversation to really elevate these inherent points of view from our artists and kind of see how it really, you know, influences, you know, their point of view, their work, you know, how they see themselves in the world. And so I just wanted to ask either of you if you could articulate, you know, maybe a cultural perspective coming from your own tribal nations of the role of women. Shaandiin.
Yeah, I guess, let's see. So the way that Navajo or Dene kind of trace their belonging, like who they belong to, is through their mother's clan. So I'm Hushklishni, which means mud clan. And so that was given to me by my mother through her mother. And so like we kind of like trace back, and that's like your main clan is from your mother. And so I obviously, or like I made a film that related directly to this like matrilineal theme of like where you belong. And to me, like that clanship is very much like a belonging. But more so than that, I think it's a really like great way to think about, like, and philosophize, I guess, about how you see yourself and how it's like so not of the individual and how it's very placed like within a giant perspective of the world. And so we, I guess we call that like a balance, and we strive for this balance in life. And I guess that for me comes through my mother, and it's nice to know, I guess, even just like the growth and the strength that has happened over like all of these generations. And I guess just where I am now, which is a very privileged place to be, like as a filmmaker telling stories. But like my own mother has had her troubles, my grandmother has had her troubles, my great grandmother has, but like it's like a continuation that I just like keeps moving on. And I think that's a really beautiful way to look at life.
I agree. Erica, what about Seneca Cayuga point of view?
Yeah, very similarly, our familial lines are tracked through the mother's side. So I'm Dewahande's clan, which means deer clan. So just like Shaandiin was explaining, came from my mother, her mother, and you know, just like as far back as I know, that's the clan that I've belonged to. And I recently have been studying my language, Cayuga. I've spent 2 years doing an immersion program, and it's really amazing to learn the language and see the absence of the patriarchy in the way that the language is structured. And so there are all these like clues to our worldviews that have kind of been covered up by colonization and genocide and all of these things, but still exist in our languages that have been you know, in many cases left untouched. And so it's just been an incredible experience to kind of see that matriarchal matrilineal society expressed in the language. And I think just small things, you know, growing up, I remember when I was 12, I got my period. And in our culture, when you get your period, it's really exciting. And, you know, we have a special ceremony that happens. And I remember my mom took me to a Chinese buffet in Miami, Oklahoma, the day that I got my period. And I loudly expressed it to the waitress that was giving us our food that we're here celebrating because I got my period. And she just gave me the weirdest look, because it's something that, you know, isn't necessarily celebrated in all cultures. And I think that clicked into me because my mother's like, you know, you don't have to tell everyone. Because for me, I had no shame, right? For me, it was this big thing that we were celebrating to go out to the buffet. So I don't know. I think that, you know, it's a great conversation to be having, and hopefully we can just continue to have it and you know, look to our ancestors to kind of help pave our way forward.
That's great. I think I share, coming from my Apache point of view, I know I get phone calls from aunties and grandmas whenever, a new young woman in the family has blossomed, because it's an exciting moment, and it's something to be shared and something to be celebrated, because there's a level of sanctity to it. And like on my Apache side, that's the time. And I think it's the same for Shaandiin's, its tribe. It's like that's the time when you begin to plan, and you have a puberty ceremony, and through that ceremony, in my tribe, we recount our creation, and we look at how the world came to be, who the first people were. And for us, the first person was a woman. And so I think when you come from a society that reveres and respects, the role of women, your view of the world, I think, is different. And a lot of times I think, we're kind of, as we navigate, American society, that's not necessarily the same. And I think that those are kind of lenses of that we kind of, I think, each bring as Indigenous people can bring to, the worlds that we work in, and not every Native American tribe is matrilineal. A lot of them are patrilineal, and so there's a great diversity with our native peoples. But for me personally, I've always found it very natural, to have women bosses, and then if I think about, ceremonial roles, where the women, basically are the directors, right? And I imagine that, do you guys carry that out in your own practice as directors, like that you do find a bit more naturalness to it?
I guess I always remember like my mom being super strong and like always just like controlling in a way that was like everybody was so intimidated by her. And I always thought that was scary. And then I realized that sometimes I like kind of have that own intimidation about myself. So I guess for me, it's nice to kind of like see these people in my life who are so close to me, and see how they act and like kind of bring themselves to something. And it kind of is just like a reminder of like me, like doing directing, like shooting anything, like doing anything in film. It's just like I want to bring that strength, but sometimes I'm hesitant and I kind of like fight against it. But it's nice to know that there are those like constant reminders of like, oh, your mom is strong. Like these people in your life have like done this all of their lives and they have this way about them. So it's just really nice to like kind of remember that and remember that in your work. And it just brings you to like a whole nother place in how you make things, how you create, how you shoot, how you ask questions about things. It's a nice reminder to have.
That's great. I think one of the things I imagine, I know for myself that, given, the tumultuous state of the world, I really do find like what you're talking about is like these levels of affirmation and comfort, in terms of where we come from and what's natural and inherent to us. And I imagine living in a COVID world, as all of us are, it's like we're really having to dig and to search, for that ongoing strength and comfort, I think, to help us deal with the scenarios that we're in. So I want to kind of pivot to thinking about that. Like, are you guys able to offer kind of points of view on your tribes, on your tribal nations, and what the state of COVID is within your communities? Erica?
Yeah, so, our ceremonies were canceled this summer, which has been a huge, it's something unheard of, really. We've been practicing our ceremonies even in secret when it was illegal to do so. And so the fact that this past week, we weren't at Longhouse, celebrating green corn is something to get adjusted to. And it was interesting to see how people kind of came together in different ways to share images and stories of ceremonies from the past online, and still trying to find this way to like connect with each other in this modern world when we're unable to be in the same physical space. And, we've had cultural leaders and spirit keepers who have contracted COVID, and luckily, everyone has recovered, but it's really scary. And especially, there's this really strange way of, many people are talking about this pandemic as if, like, you know, from the get-go, well, this only impacts older people. And for me, like, and especially in our culture, our elders are everything. Not only are they the ones that, you know, the remaining speakers that are left that can speak are all in, you know, are older people, and our elders help us make decisions. They help ground us in our culture. And I think that that's been really difficult to see, even friends of mine who are like, well, I can go out and do what I want to do because, you know, it doesn't impact younger people. And this kind of like, it's taken us a really long time. I think we're starting to see it change a bit now that we're responsible for keeping, you know, our grandmothers and our aunties and our grandfathers alive. And you know, for me, that's been shocking just to see how much we value elder people in our community versus this, you know, what I'm seeing just in American culture.
Shaandiin, what about Navajo Nation? What's happening out on Navajo Nation?
Well, Navajo Nation has been impacted in such a crazy way, in the sense that, like, per capita, Navajo Nation there for a while was like higher than any state, like compared to like New York, compared to like all of these like really crazy big places. And I guess to me, it was like, oh, these are like these huge places, but also Navajo Nation doesn't have resources. Like, there isn't hospitals everywhere. There isn't grocery stores even everywhere. So there's like a lot of like resource issues on the Navajo Nation that have caused, I guess, the loss of so many lives. But then at the same time, I don't know, like I was trying to like figure out how to say this, and that was like kind of like the prompt through these COVID videos that we made, and like trying to find like a source of inspiration through it. And it's like, to me, it just like was so sad to see, I guess, media constantly portraying Navajo Nation as impoverished, as these places that were like lack of anything because of the people, when that's like not the case. It's mostly due to resources, and it's mostly due to so many things outside of the people and their philosophy. So I guess that just like kind of made me like pretty mad that Navajo Nation was seen as like this thing that was like almost like, I guess, just like gross. And it was just like, don't portray Navajo Nation like that. I mean, it's just, it sucks because like I haven't been able to like go to see my grandma. Like, I dropped some groceries off, but I haven't been able to like sit with her. I haven't been able to like go back. Whereas before, like, I could take multiple trips. And I mean, and like Erica was saying, it's like so much of the wealth of like knowledge, and I guess like what we have, which is like teachings, lie within generations that are much older than us. And I guess to see that that there isn't a cure for it, but at the same time, Navajo Nation is like completely backtracked and like rethought of like, how do we figure this out? And now they're in a much better place. They've like placed curfews, they've done so much, and people are now looking to Navajo Nation into like, how can we like stop this spread, and how can we like really like value these lives instead of just think of things as disposable.
I'm so glad you said that, because interestingly, I had a friend of mine who works at a foundation, a funder in New Jersey, contact me, who said, you know, who do you have a contact I can speak to at the Navajo Nation? We want to learn from them, and so that New Jersey can understand how to address, you know, this crisis, because they have done such a great job. And I just love that, you know, that there's an opportunity for learning to come from, you know, a tribe and an indigenous community, because, you know, we do function differently. And I think that, you know, the matriarchal structure, I'm sure, was empowered and, you know, I've heard stories on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation where, you know, they went to, you know, the traditional chiefs council for them to kind of the tribal government went to them to activate, you know, the community patrolling and the community caretaking, you know, to implement efforts, you know, to quell the spread of the disease. And I think to this day, I think they've only had maybe one case or two cases, you know, on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation, where I have relatives from my mother's side, you know. So I think there's so many great more opportunities for learning, from our indigenous knowledge that could really benefit, not only, our American society, but probably the world. You touched on, the COVID videos, but before I get to that, I wanted to ask, Erica, you have such a fascinating story. It's like one of the things I admire about you is that, you left a corporate job in New York City, you embarked on a fiction filmmaking career that we've been able to support you through the Indigenous Native Lab at Sundance. So you also made a big leap to go learn your ancestral language, where the speakers are in Canada, on the reservation there. Can you tell us about where you found yourself as COVID hit? Borders were closing, you were considered international in your own homelands, in Canada, and had to get across the border. But tell us that story, because it's such an interesting point of view.
Yeah, I was living in New York and working, and really it was the inspiration of going through the Native Lab that really kind of inspired me to do something different. I had long kind of, I guess, not really believed in my ability to tell stories and to be a film director. And I was just filled with so much joy, being back in Oklahoma, where I grew up, filming with my community when we made Little Chief, which was supported through the Native Film Lab at Sundance. And so I just quit my job in New York and I moved to Six Nations in Canada, a reserve in Canada, and spent the past 2 years learning the Cayuga language there. And then COVID hit. And because I was an international student in Canada, I didn't have insurance there. And there's a complicated process with the Jay Treaty in regards to who can cross borders and who belongs on what side. And so I was kind of just needed somewhere to go. And I ended up coming to, northern New York, in Ithaca near Cayuga Lake to stay with a friend. And I've been here for 5 months. And so it's interesting because this is the first time I'm in my ancestral land. Like, my mother has never visited here. This would have been, the hills and the rivers and the waterfalls where my ancestors would have lived for thousands of years. And so it's been a really interesting time to be, kind of pulled away from all of these places and plans that I had in my mind's eye of how the future was going to be. But then, I see the deer running behind my house where I'm staying all the time. And I know that those are, my clan speaking to me and letting me know that I'm in the right place. And so it's strange to kind of be a refugee on my ancestral land, having never been here before, but it's been an incredible experience for me to get to continue my language studies and really have a connection to land, which, in Oklahoma, where we were displaced to, while it is our home, there's something really special about being here, where we would have been and where we should still be.
I think you were both really touching on, I think, very important information and detail that sadly is not covered in American education systems. One of the facts that I learned from the organization Illuminative, who did a national survey about Americans' perceptions of Native Americans, and all of their surveying and focus groups, and they spent millions of dollars trying to understand what contemporary Americans thought of Native Americans. They found that the average American attending the American education system stops learning about Native Americans when they're in elementary school. We're not taught in the education system. And also, one of their biggest findings was that we don't exist beyond the 1800s in the American school system. And so I think you're both, Shaandiin, when you're talking about the complexities of, this perception of, the misperception of Navajo Nation of being without and not having infrastructure and not having, there's such a history to that. It's a history of American policy to confine Native people to reservations, and to, displace them. Like Erica's saying, my mother's tribe, my Cheyenne tribe, like I said, we have relatives in Montana, the Northern Cheyenne Reservation, but there's a band of Cheyennes in Oklahoma who we were forcibly removed from our ancestral lands by the American government, from what the state that's now known as Colorado, and placed in Oklahoma, which wasn't our ancestral lands. And so, it's like it's an ongoing challenge, and I think, for us as contemporary Native peoples to, I think, be understood in American society. And besides the education issue, we also are invisible within our American media culture, within popular culture. It's like we're not when we used to have theaters, when we used to go to theaters, there was none of our films were playing in those theaters. And if you look on TV, I think Native representation on television, film and television, is sitting at around 0.04% of all representation in media. And so the two of you have really embarked on this career, I think, to contribute your voices and your storytelling, I think, to an American culture and even corporatized media system that continues to uphold this veil of invisibility. And so I just was really interested to understand how do you balance, I guess, this kind of like, I guess on one hand you have a passion for storytelling, right? You're passionate about the stories that you want to tell, but at the same time it's like you carry a burden, right? A burden of a larger society that doesn't even know you exist. Do you feel that as a pressure or a burden?
I guess I used to feel it as a burden, especially when I was making my first short, which directly related to some of my own experiences with family and addiction and that sort of thing. And I thought that I needed to tell people, I guess, inform them, make them understand issues that were happening on the Navajo Nation in a way that I guess I could perceive from like an emotional artistic lens, but it's a huge weight to carry. Like it's so tough to think in that artistic space when like what you want to do is you want to say something that's like from your perspective, and you want to not only just like speak from an indigenous perspective, but you also want to, I guess, create with an indigenous perspective, and you want to, I guess, decolonization in terms of media, but then also in the way that you create things. Like you want to change how narratives are told, but you don't just want to like change, like, I guess, that the fact that there's like an indigenous character, but also like, oh, I don't want to see like act structures or like these sort of things in narratives, or like you really, it's hard to like come at it with a very like degraded mindset and like I'm already at a burden and I'm already trying to really fight for myself, because then people kind of see you like that in a way. Like if you act like you are trying to like prove something, then people will, at least in my perception, see you as that. And so I'm really trying to take a step back now and think about like, what am I creating? Why am I creating it? Like, what am I feeling when I'm creating it? That way I really know in my heart that like, as I'm moving forward, that I'm not just doing something for myself, but I'm doing something that's speaking something that I want to say, and not, I guess, continuing that burden.
That's great. It's beautiful, Shaandiin. Thank you. One of the things I feel like both of you, we have such a, I feel like a long relationship because, Shaandiin, you came through our youth program at Sundance, the Full Circle Fellowship, and Erica, we met, because you submitted, to the Sundance Native Lab that you mentioned before, but you both came through, our Native Lab. Can you highlight maybe just, if I could just give background first on the Native Lab. It's a national competitive selection process to choose short film scripts that we then bring through a lab. We do a director's lab where they test shoot a scene. They're surrounded by a supportive, creative community of advisors, to help strengthen their voices and to, uplift their voices and strengthen their films. we typically would fund, in pre-COVID times, we would fund them to go off and make their short with them, what was basically a micro grant, right? Comparatively to what I think other people can make a short film on. But do you have, did you ever have an aha moment or a great learning moment, maybe with when you were in the Native Lab? Because our intent is really to I think, relieve you of that burden. And I don't know if we were successful or not, but I think to really fan the flames of your voice. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts about that.
I think that it's just been such a huge part of my learning journey in terms of being an artist. And I'm really grateful to you and your team and Sundance and all the work that's done to support us. And, I remember learning so much from the mentors and the process of being in the lab, but it extends beyond that. And I think that that's what's been most valuable to me is like, you've got your moments while you're in the lab that you learn important things about process and artistry and how to do this and how to set up a script and all of these things. But then it's also just the extension past that. I mean, kind of to speak to what Shaandiin was just talking about in terms of the perception. I was lucky enough to have my film premiere at Sundance this year, and they take you and you're speaking to reporters, and they do like a little bit of a press junket, I guess is kind of what it is. And I had one reporter say to me, "Oh, I was really surprised when I watched this movie because I didn't know Indians were still alive." Mm-hmm. And I'm just standing there in front of this person who basically just said I was dead and said that all of my family members are dead and that everyone I know from my community isn't alive. And these vibrant communities that I know are very much still alive. And I remember leaving that and going to one of my mentors from the Sundance Lab and being really upset about it. I was crying. I didn't know how to engage, like that responsibility of sharing a film that you want to get an emotional point across in 10 minutes, but then you're also supposed to educate them on 500 years of colonization and genocide. Like Shaandiin said, it's like a huge responsibility. And so I was so upset about this reporter's question, and one of my mentors was just like, you don't have to make stories for that person. Like, your responsibility is to make stories for your community. And I think that, that just, again, is an extension of what my lab experience was. Sure, I learned all of these things on the ground, but it's this community that I belong to where I had this moment of trauma, essentially, from this person with this question, that then I could go to someone who's been through this, who understands what it's like to get asked those questions, who understands the complexities of having to educate people on where we're coming from. And that's just one touch point, but there are so many along the way that the lab and that community that you guys have created has just been there for me in so many different ways.
Thank you. We try. Shaandiin, what about you? Did you have any specific kind of learning moment as a fellow or as working at the lab?
Yeah, I guess so many things, exactly what Erica is saying. First of all, you bring in Indigenous mentors, you bring in Indigenous peers, and it is such a surrounding of, I guess, all of these different perspectives from just different points of views in a way that is so beautiful and caring, and it doesn't I guess strip you of your ideas in a way, and it's really crazy because I remember being at the lab and being like, oh, this is my script, and then people would be like, oh, I have this idea and I have this idea, and I was kind of mad because I was like, oh, well, maybe I don't have the best ideas, which is kind of what you need to learn as an artist is you have certain ideas, but also filmmaking is so collaborative in a sense that you kind of have to really if you want to touch people and if you want to really I guess show a bit of who you are, you really have to listen. And I guess that's one thing that the being at Native Lab taught me, but also I guess when you were saying relieving burden, a huge thing for me was my family had no way of supporting me through college. It was kind of a huge jump into filmmaking in a way that was I really have to work as a PA. I have to do all of these things in order to just be in film. And for me, that was great. And I was like, I'm going to do it. Like, it's going to be fine. And I'm going to be in film because this is what I want to do. But what the Native Lab did for me and is continuing to do for people is it's giving them that financial help to help with their ideas and help them say, like, you can like make something and you can dream and you can pay people right and you can do these things in order to like make something, and it can be valued. And I guess to me it really shows that there is value in what I do, and whether that be financially or how you guys support in terms of community through like anything, that there is value in, I guess, just anything that you do, and to remember that you always have that. And I guess I appreciate that about all the labs that you guys do.
Thank you. Well, I mean, I will say that, it's like your voices, your points of view, your stories, obviously you got selected for the Native Lab from, a national competition selection process, and the way that, Sundance, we're known for our curatorial abilities around identifying those authentic, distinct, unique voices and really designing to really strengthen them and uplift them. But I have to say, like, what I think one of the most touching moments, I think, for me personally, I feel like, is when we would make the congratulatory phone call to say, congratulations, you've been selected for the Native Lab. You both wept. And I just was like, I just was so touched by that. I know that it's a difficult path as an artist, putting yourself out there for judgment, right? For assessment, and that opening up, your heart and soul to a process that you don't know how it's going to turn out. Maybe you're used to just constant barrier after barrier as an artist, So I was really touched, I guess, by your tenderness and your vulnerability, which I think is a testament to your storytelling, and the great work that you do. One of the things I was wanting to comment on, somebody asked a question of, before we move on, was asking, how can we donate aid to these nations dealing with COVID-19? I just wanted to mention to everyone that there's one organization I know that's a nonprofit that is distributing resources to a lot of other groups, and this is only one, but there are other ones. But it's called IndianCollective.org, and that's NDNcollective.org. And I know that they accept donations and are helping to source a lot of tribal communities across North America to help them deal with, and actually internationally to help them deal with the world that we're living in right now. I wanted to ask you, I wanted to paint a picture also, I think, to shed light on the importance of your voices as women, as Indigenous women, who are really being uplifted in our, within our film culture, and the film culture that Sundance Institute influences, that so much of the industry really, I think, relies upon our curatorial abilities. But, when I first joined Sundance 19 years ago, I would say probably for the first 13, 14 years that I was at Sundance, all the submissions were majority men. They were probably 99% men. And then the selections were most often 99% men as well for our Native Lab program. And then when we looked at kind of curating for the festival, it's overwhelmingly men. The majority of women filmmakers were coming from international countries like Canada, like Australia, like New Zealand, who seem to have a bit more parity, I think, in gender coming from their Indigenous filmmakers. But I think one of the trends that's been really the most fulfilling for me is to see, if we look at our slate of artists we're supporting, yourselves included, we've had a dramatic shift where it's now majority Indigenous women in the States who are really, really galvanizing and I think leading in our film community. Have you found that in your experience? Do you seem to find that there's more women?
I'll just say that, we've been here. We've been here trying to make films. I was, moved to Los Angeles after school and, didn't have any money. My mom was like, what are you doing? You don't know how to survive in Los Angeles. And went out there and tried to get work in production and PA'd. And, I've always wanted to do this. you know, ever since, I'm going to date myself here, you know, playing around with my mom's VHS recorder that we got at the Goodwill, I knew that this is the thing that I wanted to do, and I wanted to make stories. And I just hit roadblock after roadblock. I saw my peers, my male peers, just shooting ahead of me, getting attention. People would read their scripts. When I would email something in, it was crickets. You know, I had bosses try and sleep with me. You know, this Me Too movement that has moved forward and with everyone speaking is very real. And I think that all of the women that I know that I've come up with have all faced these similar things. It's like, how are you supposed to be trying to put your ideas across to your, you know, your bosses and the people above you when they don't view you as a collaborator or someone who has anything important to say? And I do think that it's changing. I see a huge shift, and I think it's largely because of programs like the Native Lab and the Sundance Labs, where it's been a mandate, right? Like, this is going to change, and we're going to change this by taking these talented people who exist and who've been out here trying to do the work, find them, bring them in, give them a safe space to explore their ideas. Like, it's okay to cry on set, right? Like, it's okay to feel emotional when you're directing something, or to feel emotional when you achieve something very large. And I think that it should be a common thing that happens. And, you know, I'm very grateful to be at this point now where, you know, Shaandiin used you know, to have that privilege to tell stories, because this is a huge privilege. And, you know, now that I'm here, the barriers are still going to be there. There's still going to be things to overcome, but it's up to me to be, you know, bringing up the next generation as much as I can, and influencing other Indigenous female filmmakers and Two-Spirit filmmakers to pull them up with us. And I feel like that's what I'm feeling right now. The folks that are ahead of me are pulling me and giving me opportunities, and the mentors that have come before me are pulling me to that place, and remembering that responsibility to continue doing that. But I could talk about this at length all day, and I'll put it, but it is changing. And I think that the more that organizations require more of themselves, I think the more we're going to see that impacting storytelling and in this beautiful way. And there are so many stories and so many perspectives and point of views that we haven't heard from. And it's an exciting time to finally be hearing those.
Thank you for that. I think these are you're right. Like, these are the conversations that are enriching and that need to be had. Because I know that, Shaandiin, you were commenting recently about, you know, just kind of the notion of the way that the Indigenous program works at Sundance compared to kind of some of the other places that you've experienced, and I hope that it's been, you know, nourishing and supportive, which I think is definitely one of the cultures that we really aim to infuse in our Indigenous filmmaking community. Because, you know, the corporate world and the corporate competitive idea sometimes it infiltrates our community perspective, where we think that there can only be one, right? There can only be one Indigenous filmmaker who gets to speak for everyone. And I think that as a community, I think we recognize, I like to think that we recognize that diversity, even in terms of tribal nation representation, and diversity of story, and diversity of gender, and the spectrum of gender are what is going to make a difference. We have a couple of questions I wanted to go to. One was, what advice would you give young Indigenous folks looking to get into filmmaking?
I would say apply to any Sundance program, any program around you, but also collaboration with other people is what I wish I would have done a lot earlier. I think I grew up in a great situation in terms of like my start in film, which was with my brothers, and it was very collaborative in the sense that we did have our arguments with each other, but we always like got past it in a way. And in that, I felt like I was never kind of put in this box as like a woman filmmaker, a woman minority filmmaker, that sort of thing, until I kind of left that and I went to college and I was like, oh, this is clearly like people are like out to get you in a way that is so, I guess, just it's kind of silly in a way. Like it's hilarious to know that like people won't let you do something unless they want to use you. And so with that also saying, protect yourself and be very stern on the things you will and won't do. And sure, it might seem like a setback at first. For example, like if you happen to be a young Indigenous filmmaker and you have a camera and somebody wants you to film something, but you don't want to do it, like say no. And of course, like that opportunity is not going to happen, but things will come in the future. And if you keep doing it, it's going to happen. And I guess just thinking that like, if you say no, that's not the end of the world. Like, and that gives you time to build on yourself and help you tell the stories that you want to tell, which are all super important. And you need to tell your stories, and there's no question about it.
Thank you for that. Erica, any thoughts, any advice to young Indigenous people wanting to get into filmmaking?
Yeah, I think it's just like, do what you can do with the resources that you have. I think for me, I wish I would have used what I had around me to create stories. I think that sometimes we're waiting for these larger institutions to like tell us or give us permission to do something. I think it's a cultural thing. I think we've long been told that we can't do certain things, so we kind of sit and wait for someone to come and say, you're ordained to be a filmmaker. And that's just not the way that it works. And even if you don't get into the labs, every single story that is submitted and script that is submitted is worthy of being created and worthy of being made. And so I think it's just remembering that rejection is real and that it's going to happen a lot. But that just to keep yourself focused on your vision and what you can do and where you can make things. Like, no one wanted to read my fiction script, so I started doing documentary because all I needed was a camera and someone to point the camera at. And so it's just finding avenues and finding ways to still tell your stories and know that no matter what or who says what, that the fact that you made it has value inherently, and that you're telling a story that is true to you and to where you come from, and that it immediately matters as soon as it's thought of. So I wish that I would have had a little bit more gumption and confidence to go after that when I was younger.
Yeah. You're still young. Well, how about a taste question? Like, who are your favorite filmmakers? Do you have any favorite women filmmakers specifically?
I've really gotten into Lynn Ramsey's films lately. And I just absolutely love how she sees things in a way that's very pace oriented. And it's not really full of, I guess, exposition. And it's very like feeling oriented. And I just absolutely love watching that on screen. And it's just, I don't know, it makes me feel something, because I feel like I would make similar films in the sense that like I kind of feel like I suck at dialogue and like all of these things that kind of like make like narrative like a narrative, but like to know that somebody can make something that's just like visual and like the soundscape kind of like drives you in a way, like it just feels like, I guess, a film that a woman would make, in the sense that it doesn't always need to be talking and like you can listen and watch things.
Mm-hmm. I love it. Erica?
Yeah, on that same note, I really love Kelly Reichardt. Really love her films. There just is this realism that I just think is so beautiful in the way that she expresses her stories. I'm also a huge fan of Sterling Harjo. I think like the films of his, as an Indigenous filmmaker, seeing him and his films early on was a huge impact for me. And I'm really loving Elamaya Tailfeathers and the work that she's been doing. And seeing what Ava DuVernay has been able to do with being a creative, but then also producing films. There's just such a wealth of inspirational, filmmakers out there who are really doing some really difficult work to open up those doors for everyone else. And it's been a great 3 or 4 years to see a lot of this stuff happening. And I should go write on my script right now. I'm so inspired by just talking about them, because there's just some, incredible work out there that I aspire to be in that group.
Well, I think you're bringing me to my next question, but I just want to backtrack real quickly and just kind of recount, your emergent story, your emerging, story, like coming from a native lab, from a short film. Both of you were very fortunate. You submitted your films to Sundance Film Festival for consideration, your short films. They got thrown into a pool of 12,000 other short films when our curators for our festival only picked between 65 and 70 short films. And so I think it's a testament to the strength of your craft and the strength of your voice. I think to actually both have been selected to participate in Sundance. And, and I know, Shaandiin, you traveled the world. Like, you were in South America, you were in Asia, you were across North America, and then Erica, you actually kind of hit, it's been a really interesting space that you've hit, because you premiered at Sundance and then the world went into lockdown, right? I remember you got invited to all these festivals, and then one by one, they all canceled. But now you've been living online, doing all the online circuit. Can you tell us what that's been like?
Yeah, it's been an intense experience all around. Like, not only is it dealing with like a global pandemic and all the stress that comes from that, but it's, coming out of having a premiere at Sundance and this momentum where I'm like texting you, Bird, late at night, like, what's the difference between an agent and a manager? Like I said, the guidance continues because you answered me and helped me find the answer to my question. But I think, it's a different world. But if anything, I feel like I come from a community that's able to kind of, go with the flow, if you will. And like when an obstacle pops up, it's like, okay, well, what do we do next? And how do we overcome this obstacle and make the best of it? And I think that, we'll be screening at our 20th virtual festival this weekend. And I think, we've actually maybe been able to reach a different kind of audience, since the films are online and people can just watch them from the safety of their homes. And so I don't know what the future of, festivals look like, but, it's been great. You make something, and I made Little Chief, this film, and you really want to find an audience and have a conversation with them. And so it's been nice to have that to go home to, with the Q&As and the screenings, because even though it's all digital, finding that audience is so important, and having the conversation around why we made the film to begin with is still existing. So we'll see what happens. I think you're muted, Bird.
You're on mute, Bird.
I was just saying, sadly, we only have 5 more minutes left. But I wanted to kind of conflate two questions. One is from our audience. The question was, how do your experiences as Indigenous women filmmakers inform your practice? But I wanted to kind of, like I said, conflate that with another question, which I think is related to, which is, what can Indigenous matriarchy offer film and the world? Who wants to jump in first at that one?
I'll jump in because I see Shaandiin's eyes going back and forth. I'll do my best to set this one up. I don't know. Well, I think for starters, I talk over every idea that I have and every creative beat in my filmmaking process with my mother. It's just what I do in life. I go to her for guidance. And so I think it's interesting that she has been a school teacher for 30 years. And now she's essentially my, creative producer on all of my works, because I go to her to talk through creative issues, or if I'm just like, is this okay to do? How do we feel culturally about this? And then also for my film Little Chief and ongoing with whatever I choose to do, I brought on a culture bearer. I brought on one of our faith keepers as a producer, not even a consultant, right? Because there's this thing that happens in cinema where they're like, oh, well, we'll just hire an Indigenous person as a consultant. And I was just like, well, I don't want to be a consultant. I want to have like a stake in this creatively and be involved. And so I didn't want to kind of perpetuate that same colonial behavior by bringing on a faith keeper from my community as a consultant. And so, you know, for my short film, you know, I brought on William Tarrant as a producer, and he very much was a producer and helped us understand the cultural landscape that we were in every single day and remind the crew of that and the cast of the film. And I think it's just being very mindful of the responsibility that we have. And I think it goes back to that question before. We don't have to take the weight of the world on our shoulders. Yeah. But we do have to take the weight of our communities on our shoulders. And every choice that I make and decision that I make as an Indigenous filmmaker goes back to, is this good for my community? If I take on a project that is going to just perpetuate stereotypes of Indigenous people because that gives me a paycheck, I'm not being responsible. And so I think that as an Indigenous filmmaker, you know, female or not, I think it's just remembering that I always have to show up back at the Longhouse and show up back home with the Seneca Cayuga and be responsible for how I communicate our community and the Indigenous community at large. Yeah. So it's a big responsibility, but it's important.
Thank you. Shaandiin?
I think Erica said it well, and I'm trying to find, I guess, another way to see this question. And the only thing I can really think of is, I guess, what I said before, like how matriarchy is kind of passed down in a way, and very much that it changes, and you kind of have to accept like all of the battles that are currently happening, and you really have to look into yourself for change and really accept the things that you create in a way that I guess reflects who you are at the moment. Like with Mud, it was very much reflecting, I guess, an emotional experience that I was going through, and I was really like looking back at it. I think of it, and I'm kind of question it, and I think, why did I make that? In the sense that sometimes I feel like it doesn't reflect the community completely, and sometimes I feel like I might have caused a burden on some things, but I hope that I can move forward from that and kind of continue to create in a way and constantly look back and question myself as a filmmaker and think, is what I'm creating something that I want to put out in the world? And also, I guess, just really look back at my whole like matrilineal line of relatives, and also think that that doesn't just extend back behind you, it extends in front of you as well, and that everything that you're doing is going to affect somebody in the future. And so really just opening those gates as much as you can, and thinking like, maybe I'm not going to be able to tell every single story that I want to say, but hopefully in the future, those youth, those young women are going to be able to say something that I never had the courage to say.
Beautifully said. Thank you both. I did want, you know, like, first of all, I just want to, you know, congratulate you for doing the work that you do and representing, you know, your communities, I think, with great pride and strength. And the two of you are indeed, I think, you know, matriarchs in training, you know, and I can't wait to see what you're going to give to the film world. I can't wait to see how the world is going to respond. I mean, even right now, you know, we have 3 Native women running for Congress, right? We have two Congresswomen. We have another woman from Idaho running for Senate. And I think that these are the major shifts that are really going to be impactful once our, you know, Indigenous women and matriarchy start to inform the world that we live in. I did also want to tell our audience that both Erica and Shaandiin have directed videos for us that we're issuing weekly. Shaandiin's was issued last Friday. It lives on YouTube, and I think we can drop the link down in there. And then also Erica as well. These are kind of basically just little 2 to 3 minute videos about how they're looking at this time of COVID how it is that they're, finding strength and just kind of living in this moment. You'll get to see, some representations of their work, but keep an eye out also for their short films, for Little Chief, and also for Mud Hashklishni by Shaandiin. And, I can't wait to see what you guys do next. We didn't get to dive into that conversation, but I secretly know what you're up to next, and I can't wait for the world to find out. Thank you to our audience for joining us. And I can't remember how I'm supposed to close this all off. Do I just click and hang up? I'm sure somebody will let me know. So we say goodbye. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Shaandiin. Thanks, Erica.
Goodbye.